The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows over Jake's ranch as he finished his evening rounds. His horse, old but reliable, plodded along the fence line that marked the edge of his property. It was then that the silence was shattered by a whistling in the sky, followed by a thud that resonated through the air like distant thunder. "Whoa, Bessie," Jake murmured, pulling the reins gently. The mare snorted, her ears flicking towards the direction of the noise. Curiosity piqued, Jake urged his horse towards the disturbance. As they crested a small hill, he saw it a small craft, unlike any he'd ever seen, half buried in the dirt of his field. Its hull was sleek and gleamed with a metallic luster that reflected the dying light. "Darndest thing, isn't it, Bessie?" he whispered to his horse as they approached cautiously. Stepping down from his saddle, Jake approached the craft. The hatch was ajar, hissing softly. He peered inside, calling out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" After a moment, a figure emerged, a woman with iridescent skin and eyes that seemed to hold swirling galaxies. She looked around, bewildered, before fixing her gaze on Jake. "Am I on Earth?" she asked, her voice musical yet tinged with confusion. "Yep, you sure are. You crash-landed on my property, ma'am." "Name's Jake," he replied, extending a hand. She looked at his hand, hesitated, and then took it. "I'm Alara. I did not intend to intrude. My ship malfunctioned. No harm done." "But what brings you to this corner of the cosmos?" Jake inquired, his eyes betraying his fascination. "I'm an explorer. I was mapping this sector when my navigation systems failed," Alara explained, her gaze lingering on the horizon. Jake nodded, understanding the thrill and peril of venturing into the unknown. "Well, let's see if we can't fix your ship. Come on, I've got tools in the barn." As they walked to the barn, Jake couldn't help but ask more about her journey. Alara shared tales of distant stars and worlds, her voice filled with passion for her adventures. Jake, in turn, shared stories of his life on the ranch, the challenges and the quiet satisfaction it offered. Inside the barn, Jake handed Alara a wrench, and together, they worked under the light of old, buzzing fluorescents. The task was tough, with Jake not fully understanding the technology, but Alara guided his hands. "You catch on quick," Alara noted, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm good with my hands. Always have been," Jake responded with a chuckle, tightening a bolt. Hours slipped by as they talked and worked. The barriers of unfamiliarity slowly dissolved, replaced by a budding respect and camaraderie. As they installed the last component, Alara stood back and sighed in relief. "Thank you, Jake. I can't believe you helped me fix it," she said, genuine gratitude in her tone. "Couldn't leave you stranded here. It's what neighbors do even if they're light years from home," Jake replied, wiping grease off his hands. Alara looked at the stars beginning to pepper the sky. "It's beautiful here," she murmured. Jake glanced up, then at her. "It is. And it's peaceful, most days. You are welcome to stay the night. Can't have you flying off without a good meal and some rest." Alara considered this, then nodded. "I would like that." As they left the barn, the lights inside flickered off, and the ranch was quiet once more. The unexpected visitor had brought a glimpse of the vast, mysterious universe to Jake's doorstep, and as they walked towards the house, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. The next morning, Jake prepared breakfast, the aroma of coffee and frying bacon filling the kitchen. Alara entered, having changed into some spare clothes Jake had found for her. They were a bit large, but she seemed comfortable enough. "Good morning," Jake greeted. "Hope you slept okay." "Better than I would have in my ship, certainly," Alara replied, taking a seat at the table. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the plate of food with curiosity. "That's bacon and eggs, a staple around here. Try it, you might like it," Jake said, serving her a plate. Alara tentatively tasted the food, her expression one of pleasant surprise. "It's very flavorful," she commented. "Glad you think so," Jake chuckled. "Today's a bit of a busy day. Got to check the fences and the cattle. Ever seen a cow up close?" Alara shook her head. "We don't have animals like cows on my planet." "Well, you're in for a treat then. How about you help me out today? Could use an extra pair of hands." "I would appreciate the opportunity to learn," she agreed, finishing her breakfast. They headed out, Jake leading the way to the barn where they saddled 2 horses. He showed Alara how to mount and ride, which she picked up with surprising agility. "So, you really travel to different planets just to map them?" Jake asked as they rode side by side. "Yes, exploration is essential for my people. We seek knowledge, to understand the universe better," Alara explained. "That's quite the job. Here I am looking after cattle, and you're out there charting stars, Jake said with a smile. It's not so different, Alara mused. We both care for living things, in our own ways. As they approached a section of broken fence, Jake dismounted and started gathering tools from his saddlebag. Here, I'll show you how to fix this. Grab that wire there, and I'll hold this part. Alara helped as Jake instructed, both working in tandem to man the fence. As they worked, Jake couldn't help but notice how quickly Alara adapted to the tasks. You're a quick learner, Alara. Ever thought about becoming a ranch hand? He joked. Perhaps I could include it in my explorations, Alara replied, laughing. With the fence repaired, they continued their ride, checking on the cattle grazing in the fields. Alara seemed fascinated by the animals, asking numerous questions about ranch life and its challenges. It's hard work, but rewarding, Jake explained. These animals depend on me, just like your crew depends on you, I reckon. That is true. There is a sense of responsibility in both our roles, Alara agreed. As the sun began to set, they headed back to the ranch. Alara dismounted with ease, a confident smile on her face. Thanks for today, Jake. I learned a lot, she said as they put the horses back in their stalls. Anytime, Alara. It was nice having company, Jake replied, patting the horse. How about dinner? I can grill something up for us. I would like that. And maybe, I can help? Alara offered. Sure thing. Let's head back and get started then, Jake said, leading the way. As they walked back to the house, the sky turned a brilliant shade of orange and pink. Jake found himself hoping that Alara's ship would take just a bit longer to fix, enjoying the company and the new perspective she brought to his quiet world. After dinner the previous night, Jake and Alara had stayed up late, talking under the stars. This morning, they were up early, the horizon just beginning to blush with the dawn. Today, we'll handle the horses, Jake announced as they walked towards the stable. Ever handled horses back on your planet, Alara? Alara shook her head. No, nothing quite like horses where I come from. Well, you're in for a treat. They're strong, smart, and if you treat them right, they'll treat you right too, Jake explained, leading her into the stable where a couple of horses whinnied gently. He picked out a gentle mare named Daisy for Alara. Here, let me show you how to brush her. Horses like to be clean, keeps them healthy and happy, he said, handing her a brush. Alara took the brush tentatively, running it over Daisy's coat. The horse nickered softly, and Alara smiled. She likes that? Yeah, you're doing great, Jake encouraged. Feel her muscles? That strength is what makes her so powerful. As Alara brushed, Jake fetched saddles and bridles. He showed her how to saddle up, explaining each strap and buckle. It's important to get this right. A loose saddle can mean a bad fall. Alara followed his instructions carefully, securing the saddle on Daisy. Like this? Perfect. You're a natural, Jake complimented her, his tone warm with approval. With the horses ready, they rode out to the far pasture. The morning was crisp, and the sky a clear blue. Jake pointed out different plants and landmarks, sharing stories of past adventures on the ranch. You ever get lonely out here? Alara asked, watching a hawk circle above. Sometimes, Jake admitted. But days like today, it's hard to feel anything but grateful for the peace of it all. Alara nodded thoughtfully. I understand that. Space can be lonely too, even with a crew. They reached a small pond, dismounting to let the horses drink. Jake sat on a large rock, patting it for Alara to join him. You know, you could stay longer if you wanted. There's plenty more I can teach you about ranch life. Alara looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she smiled, a genuine, warm smile. I'd like that, Jake. There's a lot about Earth that's fascinating. And I like learning from you. Glad to hear it, Jake said, feeling a surprising burst of happiness. They spent the rest of the morning checking water troughs and mending another section of fence. Alara's questions were endless, and Jake found he enjoyed the sound of her voice, the way her eyes lit up with every new piece of information. By midday, they were back at the house, preparing lunch together. Alara took to the kitchen easily, chopping vegetables with precision. Jake handled the grill, cooking steaks to perfection. Ever think about exploring other planets? Jake asked as they ate. Alara considered his question. I used to. Now, I'm not so sure. Earth might be all the adventure I need for a while. Jake laughed, pleased. Well, Earth's got plenty to offer, especially right here. After lunch, they planned the rest of their day. Alara wanted to learn more about the local wildlife, so Jake suggested a hike for the afternoon. As they cleared the dishes, their ease with each other had settled into a comfortable rhythm, the kind that spoke of a budding friendship and perhaps, something more. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, Jake and Elara set out on their promised hike. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the blooming wildflowers that dotted the landscape around Jake's ranch. "Ever been hiking back on your planet?" Jake asked as they followed a narrow trail winding through the fields. "Not like this. My world is more urban, lots of technology and metal. Not many open spaces like here," Elara replied, her gaze sweeping over the rolling hills. "Well, you're getting the full Earth experience now," Jake said with a grin. "Wait till you see the view from the top. It's worth the climb." They talked as they walked, Elara asking about the various plants and animals they encountered. Jake pointed out a jackrabbit darting into the bushes and explained about the local ecosystem. As they reached a clearing, Jake helped Elara up a steep section. At the top, they were rewarded with a panoramic view of the ranch and the surrounding countryside. The last light of the day gave everything a golden glow. "This is beautiful, Jake. I see why you love it here," Elara said, her voice soft. Jake nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "It's peaceful. Helps you think. You know, about life, the universe. Everything." Elara laughed gently. "A philosopher cowboy. I like that." They sat down to watch as the first stars appeared. Jake pulled out a couple of beers from his backpack. "Here, try this. Local brew." Elara accepted the beer, taking a cautious sip. "That's good. Different from what we have, but I like it." As the sky darkened, Jake pointed out constellations, explaining their myths and legends. Elara listened, fascinated, and then shared stories of her own people's astronomy. "You have such a deep connection to your land and sky," Elara observed. "It's different from how we live. We're always looking outward, exploring other places. But maybe we miss the beauty of what's right in front of us." "That's an explorer's heart for you," Jake said, understanding her sentiment. "Always chasing the next horizon." Elara nodded, then turned to him. "Jake, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure, anything," Jake replied, turning to face her under the starlit sky. "How do you handle the loneliness? Being out here, so far from everything?" Jake took a moment before answering. "I guess I've gotten used to it. The animals, the land, they're my company. But it's not so bad. Makes you appreciate the company when you have it." Elara smiled slightly. "I think I'm starting to understand that." They continued talking as the night deepened, the sky a tapestry of twinkling stars. It was a conversation that drifted from light-hearted jokes to deeper discussions about their fears and dreams. Finally, Elara stood up, stretching. "Thank you, Jake, for sharing this with me. I feel more at peace than I have in a long time." "Glad to hear that, Elara. You know, you're welcome to stay as long as you want. There's a lot more I'd like to show you," Jake said, hoping she would accept. Elara looked down at him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I think I'd like that. There's a lot more I want to see." As they made their way back down the trail, the quiet companionship felt like a promise of more shared moments to come. Their footsteps were soft on the earth, a gentle echo in the vast, open space of the ranch under the night sky. The following day brought a change in weather. Clouds rolled over the previously clear sky, and a gentle rain began to tap against the windows of Jake's ranch house. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth. Jake and Elara were seated at the kitchen table with steaming mugs of coffee. "Rain's good for the land," Jake commented, watching the droplets race down the windowpane. "Gives you a reason to stay inside, too." Elara nodded, wrapping her hands around her mug. "It's soothing. We have rain on my planet, but not like this. It's harsh, heavy. This is gentle. Wanna try making something? I mean, if we're stuck inside, might as well make the best of it," Jake suggested, a twinkle in his eye. "What did you have in mind?" Elara asked, curious. "Ever made bread? It's pretty simple, and nothing beats fresh bread on a rainy day," Jake said, standing up to gather ingredients. As he measured flour, yeast, and water, Elara watched intently. Jake explained each step, letting her feel the texture of the dough. "It's all about getting your hands in there," he encouraged. Elara followed suit, her hands tentative at first, then more confident as she kneaded the dough under Jake's guidance. "I like this. It's therapeutic," she remarked, a small smile playing on her lips. "Told you," Jake grinned, washing his hands before covering the dough with a cloth. "Now, it needs to rise. We've got an hour or so." With the bread set aside, Jake suggested a game of cards to pass the time. As they played, they chatted about everything and nothing: movies Elara should watch, places on Earth Jake wanted to visit, and stories from Elara's travels across the stars. The conversation drifted to more personal topics. "Do you miss it?" Jake asked. "Traveling in space?" "Sometimes," Elara admitted. "But I'm enjoying the simplicity here. The openness. It's a nice change of pace." The timer dinged, pulling them away from their game. The bread had risen, and Jake showed Elara how to punch it down and shape it into loaves. "Next, we bake it," he said, sliding the pans into the oven. As the bread baked, the aroma filled the house, and the warmth from the oven mingled with the heat from the fireplace. They settled into a comfortable silence, each lost in thought. Finally, the bread was done. Jake pulled it from the oven, setting it on the counter. "Well, what do you think?" he asked, offering Elara the first slice. She bit into it, her expression one of contentment. "It's delicious," she said, her voice warm. "Good," Jake said, pleased. Nothing like homemade bread on a rainy day. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady drumming against the roof. Inside, the fire crackled, and Jake and Elara moved closer to the hearth with their bread and a new pot of coffee. Sitting there, Jake looked over at Elara, who was staring into the flames. "Elara, I've been thinking," he started, unsure how to continue. "Yes?" She turned to him, her gaze inquiring. I'm glad you crashed here," Jake said, his voice honest and open. "It's been nice, having someone to share all this with." Elara's smile was soft and slow. "I'm glad, too. I didn't expect to find this connection. It's been a surprise. A pleasant one." They sat there for a while, the sound of the rain and the crackling fire filling the space between them. It was a comfortable silence, filled with unspoken words and budding possibilities. As the evening drew on, they added logs to the fire, neither ready to end the day. The simple acts of making bread, playing cards, and talking had brought them closer, turning a rainy day into a shared experience, a memory in the making. The rain continued into the evening, creating a rhythm against the window panes that seemed to sync with the flickering lights of the fireplace. Jake and Elara had moved from the cozy warmth of the hearth to the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the storm orchestrate a gentle symphony of sounds around the ranch. "You know, I've never really watched a storm like this," Elara said, her voice low against the patter of raindrops. "There's something about Earth storms, they're alive, almost speaking." Jake chuckled softly, his eyes reflecting the storm's subdued light. "They do tell a story, don't they? Each one's different. Tells you about the sky's mood." Elara turned to him, her expression contemplative. "What's it saying tonight?" she asked. "Tonight, it's just whispering," Jake replied, his gaze meeting hers. "Quiet secrets, meant only for those who take the time to listen." Their eyes locked, and a silent understanding passed between them, a shared appreciation for the world's quieter wonders. Elara shifted slightly, her shoulder brushing against Jake's as she settled closer to him under the blanket. "Jake," she began hesitantly, "back home, everything's so fast-paced, so loud. I never realized how much I needed this silence. Peace." "I get that," Jake said, turning to face her more fully. "It's easy to get caught up in noise, forgetting how it feels to just sit and listen." The conversation paused as a particularly strong gust of wind swept through the porch, rustling the hanging plants and chimes. The sound seemed to carry with it a breath of freshness, the earthy scent of rain-soaked soil rising up. "Elara, there's something about you," Jake confessed, his voice barely above the wind. "You bring a new perspective to things I've seen 1,000 times. Makes it all feel new again." Elara smiled, her eyes brightening with emotion. "And you, Jake, you've shown me a side of Earth I never knew I was missing. It's beautiful, and so are you, in your love for this place." Their shared laughter echoed softly, blending with the storm's chorus. As the laughter faded, Jake reached over, his hand finding Elara's. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a physical echo of their emotional connection. "Elara," Jake said, his tone more serious, using her name like a key to deeper confessions. "I don't want this whatever this is to end. Not yet." Elara's hand squeezed his gently. "Neither do I, Jake. There's so much more I want to explore, not just about Earth, but about us." Jake nodded, feeling a warmth that the chilly night couldn't diminish. "Stay then. Stay longer," he urged, his words laced with hope. "I will," she whispered back, the words as soft as the rain. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching as the storm began to ebb, the rain tapering off to a gentle drizzle. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Finally, Jake stood, offering Elara his hand. "Let's go back inside. I'll make us some hot cocoa," he suggested, his voice warm with unspoken promises. As they stepped back into the warmth of the house, the storm outside fading into a soothing patter, the future seemed filled with potential. Tonight had woven something intangible yet palpable between them, a delicate thread of shared secrets and whispered hopes. Inside, Jake busied himself with the cocoa, while Elara watched, her eyes never straying far from him. They moved around the kitchen with an ease that spoke of a deepening bond, each gesture and glance weaving them closer together. When Jake handed Elara her mug, their fingers brushed, and they both paused, acknowledging the spark. "To storms and secrets," Jake toasted, raising his mug slightly. "To discoveries and new beginnings," Elara responded, clinking her mug against his. They sipped their cocoa, the silence between them now filled with a warm anticipation, both understanding that they were no longer just passing companions but something deeper, something worth exploring. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean. Jake and Elara sat at the breakfast table, the silence comfortable, filled with shared glances and soft smiles. Jake broke the stillness, his voice gentle. "Elara, you ever think about what you're going to do after all this?" he asked, spreading jam on his toast. Elara paused, her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. I'm supposed to report back, continue my explorations. But..." She trailed off, her gaze lingering on the view outside the window. "But?" Jake prompted, setting down his knife. "But I find myself wanting to stay," Elara confessed, turning back to face him. "I've seen so many worlds, but none have felt like home. Not like this." Jake's eyes lit up with a mix of happiness and relief. "I was hoping you'd say that. There's a lot more to see here, a lot more to do together." Elara smiled, a weight seeming to lift from her shoulders. "Then I'll stay. As long as you'll have me." "I can't think of anything better," Jake replied warmly. After breakfast, they decided to spend the day outside, making the most of the sunny weather. As they walked through the fields, Jake pointed out the new shoots sprouting up where the rain had nourished the parched earth. "It's like the land is waking up," Elara observed, kneeling to touch the tender green leaves. "Yeah, it's a new beginning," Jake agreed, watching her interact with the earth. "Kind of like us." They spent the morning tending to the garden, planting seeds that would soon grow into a lush array of vegetables and flowers. Elara was quick to learn, her hands soon as dirty as Jake's, both laughing as they worked side by side. As they planted, Jake taught Elara about each vegetable and flower, telling her which ones needed more sun and which preferred the shade. Elara, in turn, shared tips from her botanical knowledge, discussing how similar practices were used on other planets to cultivate rare plants. "The universality of growing things is fascinating," Elara mused. "No matter the planet, the act of nurturing life remains the same." "It's a connection," Jake said, pausing to wipe his brow. "Something fundamental about caring for something else, watching it grow. Makes you invested in it." "Exactly," Elara nodded. "It makes you part of the world." By the time they finished, the sun was high, and they were both covered in soil and sweat. Laughing, they headed back to the house to clean up. After a shared lunch, they retreated to the porch with iced teas in hand. Jake turned to Elara, his expression serious. "Elara, there's something I want to ask you," he began, his heart beating a little faster. "Since you're staying, would you consider this your home too? Not just a place to stay, but a real home?" Alara's eyes softened, her hand reaching out to cover Jake's. "I already do, Jake. I didn't expect to find a home so far from where I started, but I've found it here, with you." Jake's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. "Then let's make it official. Build a life here together. And if you ever want to explore the stars again, we'll make that part of our journey too." "I'd like that very much," Elara said, her voice filled with emotion. "A life here, with you, and adventures to come. It's more than I could have hoped for." They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans, discussing what they would build together, both on the ranch and beyond. The future seemed limitless, a landscape as open and inviting as the fields surrounding them. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the ranch, Jake and Elara stood together, watching the horizon, their hands intertwined. The challenges of the past seemed small compared to the promise of the future they were building together, a future rooted in love, trust, and the joy of shared discoveries. The early morning light bathed Jake's ranch in a soft, warm glow as he and Elara walked through the fields. They had risen with the sun, a routine that had become their shared ritual. Today, however, carried a special significance. It was not just another day, it was the beginning of everything they had planned together. "Think the sun always looks this good, or is it just because we've decided to make a fresh start?" Jake joked, squeezing Alara's hand as they walked. Alara laughed, her eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Maybe it's a bit of both. The world looks different when you're happy." They stopped at the edge of a newly tilled field, surveying the land that they would soon plant together. "This is going to be our best harvest yet," Jake said confidently. "With you here, I'm sure of it. I'm looking forward to learning more about farming." "It's a lot different from navigating star charts," Alara admitted, watching a flock of birds take flight from a nearby tree. "You'll be a pro in no time. And maybe I can learn a thing or two about the stars," Jake suggested, imagining the nights they would spend stargazing. "I'd like that," Alara said, her voice warm with anticipation. As they turned to head back to the house, Jake's gaze fell on the barn that needed repainting and the fence that could use some mending. "There's a lot to do around here. I'm glad you're here to share the load and the life." Alara squeezed his hand in return. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. This is my home now, too." Back at the house, they made breakfast together, a dance they had perfected over their time together, moving around each other in the kitchen with ease. As they sat down to eat, the conversation turned to plans for the day. After breakfast, "How about we start sketching out the expansion of the vegetable garden? You had some great ideas yesterday," Jake suggested, eager to bring their shared vision to life. "Yes, let's do that. And maybe later, we can drive into town? I'd like to look at some materials, maybe get some decor for the house," Alara added, excited to make the space reflect both of their styles. "Sounds like a plan," Jake agreed, his enthusiasm matching hers. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. They mapped out the new garden layout with stakes and strings, measuring and planning. The physical work was hard but satisfying, and Jake was impressed with Alara's knack for spatial planning. After lunch, they headed into town. The drive was pleasant, with Alara curiously pointing out local landmarks and Jake sharing stories of his childhood and early years on the ranch. In town, they visited several shops, picking out materials for their projects and a few decorative items. Alara's choices were eclectic, blending the rustic charm of the ranch with a touch of modern flair from her galactic travels. As they loaded the last of their purchases into the truck, Jake looked over at Alara and felt a profound sense of contentment. "You know, I used to think this place was as good as it gets on its own. But now, with you here, it's a whole new world." Alara smiled, reaching out to touch his cheek. "And it's only the beginning, Jake. There's so much more we can do together." The drive back was quiet, both lost in their thoughts about the future. When they arrived home, they unloaded their purchases and stood for a moment, looking at the house, their home. "Let's make it beautiful," Alara said, her voice filled with determination. "We will. Together," Jake promised, pulling her close. As they stepped inside, ready to start on their new projects, the setting sun cast long shadows over the land, a reminder of the passage of time. But for Jake and Alara, time was something they now had plenty of together. They would build a life as beautiful and enduring as the land around them.